Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to learn about the 8 golden rules of user interface design. So let's go ahead and start with the rule number 1, and that rule is strive for consistency. So the user interface for your application should be consistent all across your application, and ideal terminologies should be used. So what we mean by the consistency of the user interface is that, let's suppose you're having an application with multiple activities and you have used certain kind of color theme for activity number 1. So after clicking a button on activity 2, you are redirected to a new activity, and if you're having some other kind of color scheme on the activity 2, it actually makes your application look a little bit different than the usual ones, and it appears to be inconsistent. So the rule number 1 states that you always keep things consistent across all your applications, and you basically go ahead and use ideal terminologies so that the user's learning curve is reduced. So let's take an example of a bad UI and a good UI. So a bad UI looks something like this, which is filled with inconsistent colors across all activities. On the other hand, a good UI is going to have same color scheme used across the entire app. The next thing with bad UI is that inconsistent terminologies are used, which absolutely makes no sense to the user, because the user needs to first learn those terminologies and then need to think about it. Whereas in case of a good UI, it always uses consistent terminologies which are already understood by the user. And the same thing applies for other things as well in terms of consistency. So for example, you always need to have a consistent font and font size used all across your application, because if you have different fonts on different activities, then your application is going to look unprofessional and it's not going to look trustworthy to your end user. Now let's go ahead and learn rule number 2. So it states that enable frequent users to use shortcuts. So once the user get familiar with your application, what you need to do here is that you need to provide users with shortcuts as well, so that the expert users could actually go ahead and use the well-defined shortcuts to perform tasks quickly. So this is what the first point actually says: have well-defined shortcuts so that frequent users can perform tasks quickly. So for example, if you're a new user, then you actually take the long way to save a file on the Word document. And if you are a frequent user, you already know all the shortcuts to do those tasks in a much shorter time. The next point is reduce the number of interaction it takes to complete a task. For example, your user needs to achieve some end result from your application. You want to make sure that the end result is achieved in as less number of steps as possible. Let's move on to the rule number 3. Rule number 3 states that offer feedback. When a customer performs some action and successfully completes the action, he should be notified. So as you could see on the right hand side, it says, congratulations, your order has been placed successfully. So let's say if you are making some kind of e-commerce application and the user places his own order, as soon as the order is processed, you should actually send a notification or a message to the user, so that it provides a feedback and it provides a sense of satisfaction to the user that the order has been successfully placed. If you don't do that, then the user is going to feel lost and he is not going to feel confident about the task which he has just performed. So in order to make the user more confident and in order to make him aware, you must always offer feedback. So you could do that in an Android application using a toast. So whenever some action gets completed, you could notify users raising a toast. The fourth rule states that design dialogue to yield closure. Take the user to end result as soon as possible. Let's say you're making an application wherein the user could order something. So what you need to make sure is that instead of designing multiple activities, minimize the use of activities and take the end user to his end result as soon as possible. So as you could see in this example, we only have 3 steps in which the user could place his order. First, the user has to sign up, then he needs to sign in with the username and password, and then finally he could place the order. Let's move on to the rule number 5, which states offer simple error handling. Design a system in such a way so that the user cannot make a serious error. So while making an application, you do need to know what all things could go wrong and what all errors could occur when the user uses this app. And once you know these errors, you need to know certain methods to avoid these kinds of errors. and then you need to implement that mechanism in your application so that the user would not be able to make any serious mistake or error while using your application. Rule number 6 states, permit easy reversal of any action. So let's say you're using a movie ticket booking application and accidentally, let's say you have selected wrong seats. So in this case, if there is no option to go back, undo your action, then you're absolutely going to be panicked and get frustrated because you cannot change what you have done previously. So you always need to make sure that whatever action the user performs with your application, that action is actually reversible. That is, you could go back and change it. So what this thing actually does is that it makes the user feel confident about using your application, because the user knows that if something goes wrong, there is always a way to reverse his own action. Let's move on to rule number 7. Rule number 7 states that support internal locus of control. Design system to make users initiators of action rather than respondents. So you always need to make sure that you design a system in such a way that the user initiates the action rather than making them as some sort of respondents who are going to respond to the commands given by your application. Now let's move on to the rule number 8, which states reduce short time memory load. So if you look at the user interface of Google, as you could see, there is absolutely nothing on the screen and there is only one search bar right there, so you immediately know what to do and how to use Google. So even a new user could directly go ahead and understand by just looking at the user interface that he needs to type some kind of text over there in the text box, and then he needs to hit the search button. Whereas if you look on the right hand side, as you could see, the application, whatever application that is, looks much more cluttered, and the user will absolutely not able to figure out what to do with that application and how to go ahead and interact with it. So that's actually a bad example of having a complicated user interface, because this actually puts a lot of strain on the user's short-term memory, which is absolutely not good if you consider enhancing your user experience. So always make sure that you strive for reducing the short-term memory load for your user by keeping your design short, simple, and sweet. So that's it for this lecture, and hopefully you guys were able to understand the 8 golden rules of user interface design. And if you apply these rules in your application, your applications are not only going to look better, but also they are going to provide a good user experience for your users. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.